One of the biggest bands of the late 70s built its empire on a sound that felt almost impossible to dislike. Bright piano, sharp saxophone, a voice that made alienation sound like a schoolyard chant, another voice that made cynicism sound smooth enough for radio. They sold tens of millions with an album dressed up like a joke about America. They were nominated for Grammys. They turned anxiety, class resentment, spiritual hunger, and private exhaustion into songs people still hum in grocery stores. And then the two men at the center could not stay in the same story. The charts were real, the Grammy nominations were real, the court fights decades later were real. So was the cancer diagnosis that finally stopped the only man who had been there from the beginning. But the strangest part is this: their happiest sounding music often hid the darkest feeling in the room. This is Supertramp's real story. The story of a band that made loneliness sound beautiful, became too successful to ignore, and learned that two voices can create a miracle without ever becoming one soul. And by the end, the question is not why Roger Hodgson left. It is why anyone thought Supertramp could survive after the magic that built it became the thing that tore it apart. Chapter 1. The ad that created the wound. Before Supertramp had gold records, radio hits, or that strange breakfast table version of Manhattan, it had Rick Davies, a musician from Swindon, England, who did not sound like the smiling side of the band at all. Davies was born on July 22, 1944, and his musical blood ran through jazz, blues, and Ray Charles. He began as a drummer, but piano became the instrument that made him dangerous, because he could make a smooth chord sound like it had a crooked smile. When people think of Supertramp, they often hear the high, clear voice of Roger Hodgson first. But the band began with Davies, with his rhythm, his cynicism, and his need to build something stronger than the groups he had already been through. Before Supertramp, Davies played in the joint. They were not the future, but they put him in front of Dutch millionaire Stanley Sam Miesegees, who became convinced Davies was worth backing. Miesegees lost faith in the joint, but not in Davies, and gave him a second chance with money behind it. Davies placed an ad in Melody Maker. One young man who answered was Roger Hodgson. The audition happened in Shepherd's Bush. Hodgson sang Dear Mr. Fantasy by Traffic, and Davies liked the voice. Think about that for a second. A young singer walks into an audition, sings someone else's song, and becomes the other half of one of the most recognizable sounds of the 70s. That voice would later carry Dreamer, the logical song, Breakfast in America, and Give a Little Bit.
The boy got that book there. Could we have kittens for breakfast? Oh, mommy dear.
The first version of the band was called Daddy, which sounds almost impossible now. Soon, they changed it to Supertramp, inspired by the autobiography of a Supertramp by W.H. Davies. The name was clever, the backing was real, the opportunity was real, but the wound was already there. Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson were not two halves of the same personality. Davies was darker, bluesier, more adult, more cynical. Hodgson was brighter, more searching, more melodic, almost innocent even when he was writing about pain. That contrast would make the band. Then it would split the band. First, Supertramp had to survive the one thing no clever name, rich backer, or beautiful voice can fix. Nobody was buying the records. Chapter 2. Two flops, no money, and the lineup that saved them. The first Supertramp album arrived in 1970, and it did not turn them into stars. It was ambitious, serious, and strange. But ambition does not pay for studio time when the public shrugs. Then came Indelibly Stamped in 1971. That one failed too. This is the part that gets lost once a band becomes famous. People act as if the classic sound was always there, fully formed, waiting for the world to catch up. But early Supertramp was not the band most people remember. The chemistry was incomplete, the audience was not there, and the money behind the dream was not endless. By 1972, the first version had collapsed. Stanley Sam Miesegees withdrew financial support. The early lineup fell apart. For Roger Hodgson, the future looked uncertain enough that he considered going to India. Davies and Hodgson were close to giving up. That should have been the end. 2 failed albums, no stable lineup, no rich safety net, no proof that the world needed this band at all. But Hodgson believed they still had songs, not vague ideas, songs, material that would later matter, including School, Bloody Well Right,
And to grow up just like them, one that you work on the money.
Dreamer, and even an early version of Breakfast in America.
While there's nothing better to do.
Then came the rebuild. John Helliwell joined on saxophone and clarinet, giving the band a personality no guitar could have supplied. Dougie Thompson came in on bass, grounding the arrangements. Bob Siebenberg joined on drums, bringing punch and control beneath all that polish. Now the classic lineup was in place. Rick Davies, the darker keyboard man and singer. Roger Hodgson, the high-voiced melodic dreamer. John Helliwell, the saxophone color. Dougie Thompson, the bassist holding the floor, and Bob Siebenberg, the drummer locking the machine together. This was the Supertramp people would come to know. The rebuilt band took a demo tape back to A&M Records. Hodgson later joked that the label did not even seem to know they were still signed, even though they had already released 2 albums for them. That detail is almost funny. Almost. Underneath it is a band walking back into the same building that had watched them fail, carrying a new lineup, old songs, and one last chance to prove they were not finished. That should have been embarrassing. Instead, it became the moment they found the sound that would save them. Chapter 3. Crime of the Century and the 2-Voice Machine. By the time Crime of the Century arrived in 1974, Supertramp no longer sounded like a failed experiment trying to justify its existence. Now they sounded focused. The album gave the band its first real breakthrough, reaching number 4 in the United Kingdom and number 38 on the Billboard 200 in the United States. After 2 failed albums and a near collapse, those numbers mattered. They proved the rebuilt lineup was not just better, it was the band. And the key was contrast. On one side stood Rick Davies, the keyboard player and singer with the bluesier edge. Davies could make a song feel streetwise, sarcastic, and wounded without begging for sympathy. On the other stood Roger Hodgson, the singer, keyboardist, and guitarist with the high, unmistakable voice. Hodgson sounded like innocence after it had been bruised. Together, they created the strange Supertramp trick. The music could sound polished, almost friendly, while the feeling underneath was anxious, lonely, and suspicious of the world. That trick is all over Crime of the Century. School turns childhood into a trap, not a playground. It is pressure, bells, rules, expectations, and the slow realization that the system is shaping you before you understand what it wants. Then comes Bloody Well Right.
I guess it's hard not to agree.
Driven by Davies' cynical bite. This was Davies smirking through frustration, turning class resentment and anger into a groove sharp enough for radio. The song reached number 35 on the Billboard Hot 100, giving the band an American foothold. And then there was Dreamer. That was Hodgson's side of the machine in full color. Bright, odd, almost childlike, but not empty. Dreamer reached number 13 in the United Kingdom, and it showed how Supertramp could make vulnerability sound catchy instead of weak. The album worked because it was not only Davies and Hodgson. John Helliwell gave the band theatrical color. Dougie Thompson kept the arrangements grounded. Bob Siebenberg gave the songs force without making them heavy in the obvious way. That balance mattered because Supertramp was walking a narrow line. Too much progressive ambition, and the songs might become cold. Too much pop sweetness, and the darker intelligence would disappear. Crime of the Century found the middle. The album did not make them the biggest band in the world overnight. That would come later. But it gave them proof. Their weird combination could work commercially, critically, and emotionally. It also proved something more dangerous. Supertramp did not succeed because Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson were the same kind of writer. They succeeded because they were not. One brought the bite, one brought the ache. For a while, that difference made the music richer. But once Supertramp found that magic, they became cleaner on the surface and stranger underneath. Chapter 4. From Give a Little Bit to the Edge of the Explosion. After Crime of the Century, Supertramp had proof that the strange formula worked. But proof is not the same as safety. Their next album, Crisis? What Crisis? Arrived in 1975.
And everyone's willing to try. And if we
And it did not hit with the same force. That mattered because Supertramp was still not the kind of band that could coast. They were too polished to seem dangerous, too strange to feel fully mainstream, and too thoughtful to become simple radio decoration. They needed another step forward. That step came with Even in the Quietest Moments. In 1977, the album gave them a warmer doorway into the wider public, mostly because of Give a Little Bit. On the surface, it sounded open, generous, almost easy.
I'll give a little bit. I gave a little bit of my life.
The kind of song that could slip into everyday life without making people feel like they were listening to progressive rock. That was part of the trick. Give a Little Bit reached number 29 in the United Kingdom and number 15 in the United States, and Even in the Quietest Moments became the band's first US gold album. For a group that had nearly died after 2 flops, that was not a small victory. Now casual fans were coming in. They heard bright melodies, clean production, saxophone, piano, and choruses that felt friendly enough to trust. But underneath the polish, Supertramp still carried the same nervous system: distance, doubt, pressure, escape, and the feeling that modern life was turning people into strangers. They did not become popular by removing the ache. They learned how to hide it in prettier clothes. The 5-man lineup made that possible. Rick Davies, the darker voice, kept the music from becoming too sweet. Roger Hodgson, the high-voiced dreamer, kept it from becoming too bitter. John Helliwell gave it charm and bite. Dougie Thompson and Bob Siebenberg kept the whole thing from drifting into cleverness for its own sake. By the late 70s, Supertramp had become something rare, a band that could sound expensive, emotional, odd, and radio-friendly at the same time. But that kind of balance is hard to hold. The bigger the band became, the more pressure landed on the 2 men at the center. Listeners heard Supertramp as one sound, but inside that sound were 2 instincts pulling in different directions. One wanted bite, one wanted lift. One leaned into smoke, blues, and adult disappointment. One reached for innocence, melody, and spiritual release. For a while, that tension made the songs glow. Then came the album that looked like a joke, sounded like sunshine, and carried the weight of a band already starting to split inside. Chapter 5. Breakfast in America and the Peak That Broke Them. The cover almost dares you not to take it seriously. A waitress posed like the Statue of Liberty. A glass of orange juice standing in for the torch. A breakfast table version of Manhattan behind her. That was the face of Breakfast in America, released in 1979.
Don't you look at my girlfriend, but she's the only one I got.
At first glance, it looked playful, maybe even ridiculous. But the music inside was sharp, lonely, restless, and far darker than the packaging suggested. That contradiction became Supertramp's greatest commercial moment. Breakfast in America held number 1 in the United States for 6 weeks. According to Reuters, it sold more than 30 million copies worldwide. It earned Grammy nominations for Album of the Year and Best Pop Performance by a duo or group with vocal. Think about that for a second. This was a band that had once walked back into A&M Records with a demo tape after 2 failed albums. Now they had one of the biggest albums on the planet. And still, the old tension was right there in the songs. The logical song gave Roger Hodgson one of his clearest statements. His voice was bright, but the feeling was not innocent. The song looked back at childhood and education with a sting, asking how wonder turns into confusion. It reached number 7 in the United Kingdom and number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. That was not just a hit, that was a wound with a chorus. Then Goodbye Stranger brought in the other side of the band. That was Rick Davies. smooth and sly, with the Wurlitzer electric piano giving the track its cool, smoky confidence. Goodbye Stranger reached number 57 in the United Kingdom and number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100. Same band. Completely different emotional weather. Then came Breakfast in America, the title song, with Hodgson turning fantasy, hunger, and escape into something almost absurdly catchy. It reached number 9 in the United Kingdom. The song sounded light, but it carried the old Supertramp trick again, a smile with loneliness behind it. And Take the Long Way Home turned that feeling into one of the band's clearest emotional pictures. It reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, and it sounded like success from the outside while asking what happens when home itself starts to feel strange. That was the secret of Breakfast in America. It sounded like a victory lap, but it kept asking why victory did not feel better. The album took months to perfect, and that perfection mattered. But a massive hit does not just reward a band, it traps them inside the version of themselves the world now wants forever. For Supertramp, that meant the public heard unity at the exact moment private unity was becoming harder to hold. After the Breakfast in America tour, the human cost started showing. Family life, children, exhaustion, and different priorities pulled the members away from the old mission. Roger Hodgson later described the band's happiest-sounding era as darker underneath, and that tells you almost everything. The songs could still sparkle. The mood inside was changing. This is where the story turns. Not because the band forgot how to play, not because the songs stopped working, not because the audience disappeared. The cruel part is that Supertramp reached its peak while the emotional center was already under strain. The world heard a band at the height of its powers. Inside, the two-voice machine was becoming harder to keep alive. Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson could create magic together, but magic is not the same thing as peace. After that, the band could still make records. What they could not do was pretend the center was holding. Chapter 6, Famous Last Words, The Long Split, and the Final Silence. The title almost feels too perfect. Famous Last Words. When Supertramp released it in 1982, it was not officially presented as the end of the classic story. But that is what it became. It was Roger Hodgson's final studio album with the band. And once you know that, the title stops sounding clever and starts sounding like a warning nobody wanted to read. The band could still produce a hit. It's Raining Again reached number 26 in the United Kingdom. And to a casual listener, the machine still seemed intact. The voices were there, the name was there, the polish was there. But inside, the unity was not. Hodgson later described Famous Last Words as a final attempt to salvage something. That line makes the album feel less like a normal follow-up and more like a photograph of a band trying to smile through the last stage of a relationship. By 1983, Hodgson left. That was the break the band never truly healed from. Hodgson released In the Eye of the Storm in 1984, while Rick Davies carried on with Supertramp. Davies-led versions of the band released Brother Where You Bound in 1985 and Free as a Bird in 1987. The name survived. The same emotional engine did not. At its peak, Supertramp was the collision between Davies and Hodgson, between bite and ache, between the smoky adult voice and the bright wounded one. Remove one side, and the balance changes. And the split did not fade cleanly into nostalgia. There was no full reunion that repaired the story. There were separate careers, separate performances, and long-running tension over songs, legacy, and money. Even decades later, the songs were still valuable enough to keep the old wounds alive. In 2025, Reuters reported that a U.S. appeals court revived a lawsuit by Dougie Thompson, John Helliwell, and Bob Siebenberg against Roger Hodgson over songwriting royalty sharing. According to the report, Hodgson had stopped making certain payments in 2018. The former band members had sought nearly $1.3 million, and Rick Davies had settled separately in 2023. That is a brutal final echo. A band that once made Alienation sound elegant ended up with former members still fighting over songs recorded long ago. The music kept traveling. The peace did not. Then came the final silence around Davies. Rick Davies had been the one constant from the beginning. He was there before the name, before the breakthrough, before the rebuilt lineup, before Crime of the Century, before Breakfast in America, before the split, and after it. But illness eventually stopped even that. Davies battled multiple myeloma for more than 10 years. A planned 2015 European tour was canceled after his cancer diagnosis. On September 6, 2025, he died at age 81. There is no need to turn that into a myth. The plain fact is heavy enough. The man who placed the ad, survived the failures, found the sound, endured the split, and carried the name after everyone else had moved into a different chapter was gone. For one strange and brilliant stretch, the impossible combination actually worked. Rick Davies brought the bite, Roger Hodgson brought the ache. John Helliwell, Dougie Thompson, and Bob Siebenberg gave that contrast shape, color, and force. Together, they made loneliness sound polished enough for radio and strange enough to last. But the same contrast that made Supertramp unforgettable also made the band almost impossible to keep together. The songs still float. The story underneath never really did. And maybe that is the final irony of Supertramp. Their music often sounded clean, bright, and almost weightless. But the story behind it was anything but light. It was built from failure, pressure, contrast, exhaustion, pride, and two creative minds that needed each other until they could no longer stand inside the same machine. Supertramp did not survive as one perfect family. Most great bands do not. But for a while, Rick Davies, Roger Hodgson, John Helliwell, Dougie Thompson, and Bob Siebenberg found a balance millions mistook for ease. That was the trick. The songs sounded effortless. And if this story brought back a record, a radio memory, or a song you had not thought about in years, subscribe for more real stories from rock's most unforgettable bands.